In the last lecture, we learned how to handle form submission in React. So in this form, when the user enters the product details and when he clicks on this add product button, this form will be submitted and a product object will be logged in the console, as you can see here. So here we have that product object with these values. Now what we also want is when this add product button is clicked and when the product object is created, after that we also want to clear this form. And to do that, we can basically use two-way data binding. Let's see how we can do that. Let's go to VS Code. Now here, to gather the user input from the form, we are using state. But we could have also used global variable and we could have set that global variable with the user input. Let me show you that with an example. So here, to capture the name of the product, we are creating this pname state. Now instead of creating this pname state, we could have created a global pname variable like this. And initially we could have assigned it with the empty string. Let me comment this code for now. Then inside this name input handler function, we could have simply set the value of this pname global variable with this value. And this could have also worked. Let me save the changes and let me show you that. So let's clear everything here. Let's create a new product, maybe test 2. Let's say price is 100. Product description, maybe test description. Let's say product is available. And I will not choose any image here and I will click on this add product button. So you can see again a product object has been logged here. And if we see the pname property here, you will notice that this pname property is assigned with the value which we have entered inside this input element. So if we would have used global variables instead of state, that could have also worked. Then why are we using state here? We are using state here because state provides two-way data binding when working with forms. First of all, we have already learned in our previous lectures that when we use global variables, we can assign these global variables with the value which we want to assign it with. But those values will not reflect in the web page. That's because when the value of the global variable changes, it is not going to re-evaluate the component function. So the web page is not going to refresh and show the updated value when we use global variables. But that is possible in case of state. So when we use state, we know that whenever the value of the state changes, it re-evaluates the component function and it displays the updated value in the web page. And using state also provides two-way data binding. And using this two-way data binding concept, we can clear the form whenever the user clicks on this add product button. Let's see how we can do that. So the first thing which we need to do is on each of these input elements, we need to add the value attribute. And to this, we can assign the respective state. For this input element where we are gathering the product name of the product, to this value attribute, we can assign this pname state. Okay, so here we have this pname state. So this pname state, okay, let me uncomment this here and let me remove this global variable from here. And let's also remove this code from here. It was just to explain you. And let's uncomment this line of code. So this pname state is going to store the product name. So whatever value we enter inside this input element, this pname state is going to store that value. So we are going to bind this value attribute with that pname state. In the same way, for this input element where we are getting the price of the product, again we can add this value attribute, and to this we can assign p price state. So this p price is going to store the price which the user has entered in the price text box. And we can do the same thing for other input elements. So here again on this input element I will add this value attribute, And here the state name is p description. Then on this input element of type checkbox, again I am going to add this value attribute. And since this is a checkbox, I'm not going to add a value attribute. Instead, I'm going to add checked attribute. Okay, and to this I want to assign p available. So this is another state which is storing the value which the user has selected in the checkbox. If the user has checked the checkbox, in that case this p available will store true, otherwise it will store false. And in the same way, on this input element where we are selecting the image of the product, we can make two-way data binding with this p image URL state. So this is the first step. On each of the input elements, we are adding this value attribute, or we are adding this checked attribute if it is a checkbox. And in this way, we are making two-way data binding. Whenever the value in this input field will change, that value will be assigned to this p description. And from this component, if we change the value of this p description, that will be visible in this input element. Okay, so in this way, here we have established two-way data binding. Now, the second thing which we need to do is when this button is clicked, that means when this add product button is clicked, this event handler function will be called. So inside this event handler function, we want to set the input fields. So these input fields to empty string, and we want to set this checkbox to unchecked. And to do that, we can call these state updating functions, which this use state function is returning for each of these states, and there we can assign an reset value. Okay, so inside this event handler function, this submit event handler function, let's go ahead and let's call update name, and let's set it to empty string. In the same way, let's call update price, and again let's set it to empty string. Let's also call update description, let's set it to empty string. Let's also call update availability, and let's set it to empty string. And finally, let's also call update image URL, and let's set it to empty string. Now for this update availability, we want to set it to either true or false. So let's say it should reset to false. Here, if we pass empty string, in that case also it will work, because empty string will be type coerced to Boolean value false. That's because empty string is a falsy value. So when the empty string will be converted to its Boolean type, it will be converted to false. And that's why here, when we have set this p available to this empty string, that's why whenever this page loads for the first time, you will see that it is unchecked. But if I set it to some string which is not an empty string, maybe hello, and if I save the changes and if I go to the web page, you will notice that when we refresh the page, this checkbox is checked. That's because a non-empty string is a truthy value. That means it gets type coerced to Boolean value true. So since it is true, since this value will be type coerced to true, that true will be assigned to this p available. And that's why this checkbox is checked here. Okay, so even if we assign an empty string here, that is going to work, but it's a good practice to set the value explicitly. So here also I will say false, and here inside this event handler function also, when we are calling this update availability, I'm going to set it to false. All right, with this, let's save the changes. Let's go to the web page. Let me clear everything here. Let's create a new product. Let's call it test3. Let's say product price is $14.99. Product description is product description. Let's select this checkbox and let's click on this add product button. So you can see A new product object has been created with those values, and now this form has been cleared. Okay, so this is how we can clear a form after that form is submitted. Now remember that two-way data binding is very important concept when working with forms because it allows us to gather user input and then it also allows us to reset the form. For example, when the form is submitted. And to use two-way data binding in React, we need to use states like we are doing here.